Hi everyone, welcome to my channel if you're new here. Welcome back if you're a returning viewer or subscriber. Today's video is going to be my wrap up for the month of June, talking you through every single book that I read in June. It was a quite successful reading month in terms of quality and quantity. I had a real kind of range of ratings, but I did have a fair few that were quite high, and I also managed to get to 6 books, although one was a DNF, but it wasn't really like a DNF with any like hard feelings, if that makes sense. I think this is probably one of the first months in a long time that I have every single book here physically to share with you. The end of June marks halfway through the year. We got to 32 books in the first half of the year. I'm quite happy with that number. I feel like that's a good solid number, particularly as I'm not concentrating on quantity this year, more so quality of the books I'm reading and also like what books I'm getting to, so even some like longer titles and things like that. So I'm happy with 32 and I'm happy with the books that I managed to visit in June. The first book I read was Crown of Coral and Pearl by Rutherford, and this was my kind of like audiobook read of the month. So I listened to this on Spotify's audiobook system, and I would recommend the audiobook. It was a good audiobook, but aside from that, the book itself was really interesting. So I picked this one up because it's been on my shelves for years and years and years. I think I got it in like 2019 or something like that, and I just found it in the charity shop. I'd seen it kind of around the place. I don't know, I was kind of intrigued enough to purchase it, but not intrigued enough to pick it up anytime soon. So when I saw that it was on Spotify, I was like, right, now's the time. I need to decide whether I'm going to be keeping this book or not, and I gave it a go. This book really pleasantly surprised me. In it, we're following two sisters. We're following Zadie and we're following Noor, but Noor is the main character. But what really impressed me about this book is that the world is so unique. Zadie and Noor and their family and friends and whatever live in the area of this fantasy world where they're on water, so they live in these kind of stilt houses and they spend their days diving for pearls, because the royal family, who they don't know, the royal family who live on the land miles and miles away, pay them for their pearls, and that's the only way they can get by. They definitely live in kind of poverty, but they have a very simple, like, wholesome lifestyle when they're not kind of struggling to put food on the table. Each of the people in the village is very kind of satisfied with their work and also with the way that they interact with each other. The one thing with this land though is that beauty is everything. In terms of like your natural beauty, what you're born with, aside from pearl gathering, that is your currency, because when there's a new heir from the royal family, they always marry the prettiest girl in the sea village. Zadie and Noor are the prettiest. They're identical twins, but Noor is injured. She has a scar on her face, and that means that Zadie is going to be the one who's going to be taken by the king. But the thing is that these villagers don't have any knowledge of what the kingdom's actually like what the land is like, where they live, what quality of life they have, what these people are even like, because they are met by like a messenger from the kingdom who then takes them away and they're never to return to their family. So the whole setup for this world, the world building, the customs of the land, the whole like relationship the characters have with the sea is so clever and so like well thought out and constructed. I was really impressed by that, and I would really highly recommend this to anybody who is a YA fantasy reader but is feeling kind of like the genre is becoming a little bit repetitive. Overall, I gave this book 3.5 stars. It wasn't my favourite thing I've ever read. I just wasn't massively engaged with the story, but I really enjoyed the construction of the plot, the world, and also the characters, and particularly the depiction of the sister relationship. I think it's really interesting because it really delved into like sibling relationship, but something so much closer than that, because of course Zadie and Noor are twins. There's definitely like a bunch of trigger warnings with this book. Like, it is kind of brutal at parts. And the other thing is that Zadie and Noor's mother is terrible, and that's because she is obsessed with her daughters being beautiful, because you know that's the way they'll get like respect for their family or whatever. Yeah, there's that as well. But yeah, highly recommend if you want a unique fantasy read, YA fantasy read. This is a duology as well. I'm not sure I'm gonna read on. I feel like I might possibly unhaul this book, but yeah, 3.5 stars. I was very like pleasantly surprised and impressed by this book. The next book that I read in June was Near to the Wild Heart by Clarice Lispector. This is my first Lispector. Okay, what do we say about this book? We're following this girl in this very fragmented way. We're following her when she's a little girl, and then as she grows up and she gets married, and it's about her relationship with other people. It's her relationship to the world, her relationship with herself. Like I said, it's very fragmented, so it's told in this almost like stream of consciousness style. If that's not your thing, you will hate this. I really had a lot of hope for Lispector because I feel like I'm drawn to books that lean a little bit more philosophical in terms of their themes and their indirectness, but this book was a little bit of a maze for me. There were individual lines that were like 5-star worthy, but a lot of it was just incredibly confusing, and it was one of those books that I think is only as good as you allow it to be, if that makes sense. As in, you find as much meaning within it as you are able to put into it. If there's some sentence that's very kind of like mystical and elusive, you finding the truth in that is what you're going to get the enjoyment of the novel from. With the lispector, it is kind of necessary to give it a go if you're unsure. That's definitely like what I did, and I think that I'm glad that I tried it, but I don't know. I feel like I'm nervous to go into her other work. I own 2 of her other titles, and this one just really, I found it difficult to read and get through. I know that all the lispector fans will be like, you just don't get it. Maybe I don't. Maybe that's the thing. But the point is that like I had like a genuinely unenjoyable reading experience with this, because like I said, some lines were like, wow, that's magical. But the vast majority of the book, aside from that like 3%, was what the actual heck is happening. I could read out some quotes. I feel like that might help you understand what this book is kind of going for. What she couldn't grasp with her hand was now glorious and tall and free, and trying to sum it up was useless, pure air, summer afternoon, because there had to be more than that. A useless victory over the leafy trees, and nothing to do of all things. That, yes, that, if God existed, he would surely have deserted that suddenly excessively clean world, like a house on Saturday, quiet, dustless, smelling of soap. One day, after speaking at last, will I still have something to live on? Or will everything I say fall short of or beyond life? I try to push away everything that is a life form. I try to isolate myself in order to find life in itself. However, I have relied too much on the gain that distracts and consoles, and when I pull away from it, I find myself brusquely forsaken. The minute I close the door behind me, I let go of things instantly. But then lines like this really, I love this one. The moist reflections of the lamps on the mirrors, the ladies' brooches and the men's belt buckles, communicating at intervals with the chandelier through slender rays of light. At first I wasn't going to rate it, but I had to acknowledge the fact that I was really dragging my feet through the end of it, kind of battling to not drown amongst it. It is a book that was kind of tempted to DNF, although I was kind of desperate also to get down to the meat of it in an effort to understand what it was about. But I rated it overall, I gave it 2 stars. One thing I do want to say is that someone told me to start here, and that I assume is because this is lispector's first piece of work. She wrote this when she was very young, and it definitely feels a little bit kind of self-indulgent in that way that you are when you are young and you are kind of facing what the world is, what life is for the first time in a way that's not through so much of a childlike lens, but one that's kind of on the bridge between that and adulthood. But within reviews, I've seen that this book is actually very difficult to understand because of the fact that it is her first piece of work. She hasn't fully fleshed out her ideas, she hasn't got a grip on how to communicate those. So I think that I could have more hope with her other work. I would also love one that had a bit more of a narrative structure, because I feel like that's what I was really kind of like grasping at with this book. There was like a very loose skeleton that we were following, but the majority of it was just this stream of consciousness confusion that I couldn't really tap into too much. I'm not angry at this book. I'm disappointed at myself that I didn't get it, but I also don't want it to be one of those books that's like, you only get it if you get it, because I think there are a lot of very kind of like snobby reviews about this book and about other people who haven't understood it, when I think it's perfectly fine to not know exactly what's happening in another person's psyche. If you're not understanding Clarice Lispector, it could be just because she hasn't communicated it well enough. Maybe that's a hot take. Next up though, the actual joy of my heart. I read a 5-star read, Error Fire by Sarah J. Maas. This is book 3 in the Throne of Glass series, an 8-book fantasy series that is just, it's epic. Kind of just getting to terms with how big this world's going to be, how big the plot is going to be, how complex each of the characters are. I'm just so impressed by this world, and I'm so in love with it. I am a massive Akatar fan. I know people really hate on that series and they hate on people loving it, but like I've loved it since the dawn of time. I read the first book in 2016, which was a year after it was first published. It was the paperback release, and I literally adored it. From page 1, I was in love with that series, and I always assumed, because I'm like absolutely die-hard fan of that series, this one would be the lesser one. But I just think this is one of those books that it takes longer to fall in love with. One of these series that takes longer to fall in love with. But I'm almost there. I can't really tell you too much of what it's about just because it is a 3rd book in the series. But we follow Celaena Sardothien, and she is an assassin. And in the first book, she competes in a bunch of trials in order to become the king's personal assassin and do the king's dirty work. So at the start of this book, Celaena is sent out to do a mission for the king, and things kind of deviate from there, and we're introduced to a bunch of new characters and a bunch of new magic within the world, and it's so beautiful and expansive, also very deep. One of the things I loved in this book, but also what made it quite a difficult read, is the fact that Celaena is depressed. Celaena is suffering with depression. The depiction of that was so beautifully done, so carefully and considerate, but also so true to the experience of that. As someone who has dealt with that, I found this really, really moving, really beautiful to see, particularly in a YA book. It was handled so delicately and gently, but also you really saw the depths of Selena's suffering as well. So I was just in and out of tears, like for the majority of this book. It was crazy. I was so emotionally invested in this world and these characters. Every single one of them feels like someone I know personally and someone I deeply care about. The end was just wild because I was so emotionally wrapped up in the story. I'm buddy reading this series with Lucy from Library of Lucy. I really enjoyed the buddy reading experience with her. Unfortunately, I kind of ruined it this time around just because I fell so far behind, and then I caught up. I didn't catch up, but I got to the end of the book thinking that she'd finished like a week ago and she actually hadn't finished it yet, so I just messed up the entire thing. I'm hoping we can do better with the next read, which is Queen of Shadows, because I thoroughly enjoyed the experience and I definitely felt the loss of the interaction with her towards the end of this book when I was reading it solo. The first 50%, I'd say, or maybe even 60%, just felt really, really comfortable. I felt this huge connection with the book, but it was definitely like a kind of quiet love. I wrote in my notes, actually, it was like a Sunday kind of love, just in that sense that it was something that was not like passionate and forceful, but it was slow and gradual and building, rounded, this feeling of absolute kind of peace and calmness just existing in this world, even when all these like dramatic, crazy things were happening. And then the last half, I was just like genuinely in love with. That was the point where I was like, I'm obsessed. And that's the reason why I feel like it had that like soft, slow, I just adore this world 5-star feel at the start, and then this is everything and it's truly changing my life 5-star feel at the end. So this was just like almost like a 6-star read. I would say this is probably one of my favorite books of all time now. I feel so familiar with Sarah J Maas's writing. I think she really kind of excels in this series. I don't enjoy her writing in Crescent City so much, but yeah, I just feel so familiar with her worlds, even though I'm exploring so much more that's new about this one, just because it's her writing. So yeah, overall just a stunning experience. One of my favourite books of the year for sure, and definitely my favourite book of the month. Right, next up I read Calypso by David Sedaris. Another book that's been sitting on my shelves for a while, a book that I picked up in the charity shop. I don't know, I'd heard a bunch about David Sedaris. He writes memoirs, but he writes them in this very kind of humorous way, even when he's dealing with something very, very difficult. Like one of the examples in this book is the death of his sister, the surprise kind of death of this sister who his family is very distant from. Writes that with humour. Not in like a way that is like masking the pain, but it's like a fondness towards his sister and towards his family and things like that. And he's known for that kind of high level of like clever humour running throughout his autobiographical work. So this book is kind of no different from his usual stuff, but this one I'd say is a very kind of like popular piece of work by him. So I started physically actually, and then I moved to the audiobook, and I just gradually started to notice that his sense of humour was often at the expense of other people, and the jokes just didn't really sit right with me. It felt like the humour became very cheap because of this, and you could tell that he was very intelligent, he wrote very well, but I just felt like it just didn't sit right with me. And then there was a section as well, a particular, like, I don't know, an essay or like a piece of writing on Jesus that, you know, as a Christian, I found just really difficult to kind of like endure, and I just was like, why am I bothering with this? Because it's clearly not for me, and I'm finding it like almost like borderline a little bit offensive, if anything. So I'm gonna put it down. And yes, it was like a very interestingly done audiobook, very kind of smoothly produced in the fact that it had like this music that would start at the end and the beginning of each chapter or each essay, I guess. Not the book for me, but that's completely fine, and I'm sure it's for somebody else, so this will be going back to the trolley shop. Next book was another book that I loved, Despair by Vladimir Nabokov. My second Nabokov. I read Lolita, read this one. Lolita was like around a 4-star read for me. This one, 4.5. Absolutely loved it. So ingenious. Nabokov is just above and beyond. Just the absolute like kind of creme de la creme of writing. Pick up a Nabokov. This one was great. Definitely an underrated one of his. One that Nabokov fans really seem to enjoy. But people who are not those people are not massive fans of his, as in like they're not part of like the Nabokov fandom, generally haven't really heard of this one. I thought it was amazing. I thought it was incredible. I think it's a very, very neglected piece of his work. Someone emailed me the other day actually. They mentioned how they found me through the video I did on this one, because I did a vlog on this, and they said it was amazing because they'd never seen anybody on YouTube talk about despair before, which is kind of crazy. But yeah, in this book we're following Herman. He is this absolutely delusional, like mentally ill man running around Germany. And he meets this man called Felix, who he absolutely swears is his doppelganger, his exact like for like. Felix himself doesn't see it, and you get the sense throughout the novel, though you're never directly told, that other people don't see it either. But Herman very much believes this to be true. Felix is a homeless man, and he hatches this plan with him to switch both their lives around, but in doing so, this book absolutely spirals out of control. It's kind of crazy. I would just say go along for the ride. Although if you are interested in my thoughts of it, it's all spoiler free and whatever, check out the vlog. I did a video in which I read Alex Hanna's favourite book, and this is it. This be it. I don't know, it was great. It was beautiful. Such a great time. 4.5 stars. I just loved it. Last book I just realised I didn't write any notes on, but that was Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber. This is my 4th Stephanie Garber. I read the Caravel trilogy, Caravel Legendary and Finale. Caravel and Legendary were 4-star reads, and then Finale was a 4.5. This one was a 4-star as well, almost like a 4.25. Really, really good, really, really fun. The first book in a series. Gosh, how do I even describe this? So we follow Evangeline. There's some situation and she feels like either like she makes the move now or a part of her life will be ruined. So she makes a deal with the Prince of Hearts, this guy called Jax. If he does this thing for her, if he saves this aspect of her life, she has to grant him 3 kisses. And this is not 3 kisses to him, but 3 kisses to whoever he so chooses, whoever he pleases. This seems like a great idea at the time because Evangeline is just in desperation. She's in dire need of this thing being fulfilled by Jax. She realizes that making a deal with the Prince of Hearts, who is a fate, is a terrible, terrible idea. And you see kind of like the succession of events following this deal that is all as a direct result of their kind of bargain, of their agreement. The book is just like this meandering chaos. So much happens. It's just like I don't know how to. I can tell you about the deal, but I can't tell you about the plot because it just goes all over the place, and I feel like that is probably a good thing that I can't talk to you about it because it's kind of fun to explore by yourself and just go along with the flow of the book. I feel like that's a lot what this book is about. It's just like going with the flow and seeing whatever Stephanie Garber creates in her mind, because this book is absolutely magical. It's a YA fantasy and it's one of the most beautifully built worlds. It's kind of like lucid in the fact that anything can happen, anything can jump out of nowhere. We've got tiny flying dragons, we've got all these crazy, stunning like cakes and drinks. There's so much magic in this. There are all these tales to do with the past and legends of magic stories. Very highly built up on the idea that it's like a fairy tale read. 4 stars because I loved it. I loved the world. I loved the characters. Didn't get the 5-star feel, and I also just found that I wasn't heavily invested in the plot, basically. I'm interested to see the relationship between Jax and Evangeline, but I feel like this book was kind of sold to me as very, very heavy romantic, and we actually don't get a lot of romance in this first book at all. But I love Stephanie Garber's writing. I'm such a fan of her. I think she's a wonderful person from what I've seen, and I've been following her for almost like a decade and loved the Caravel trilogy, and I can tell that this one will be one that I should probably enjoy over books 2 and 3 as well. So there you have it. Those are the 6 books that I got to in the month of June. Here they all are. DNF'd Calypso, had that 2-star read with Near to the Wild Heart, but pretty much everything else was just such a win. 3.5, 2, 5, DNF, 4.5, 4. But to have a 4, a 4.5 and a 5, that's wild. And also a really pleasant 3.5. Really good reading year. I've had so many 5-star reads, and I'm also getting to a bunch of books that have been on my TBR for a long time, which I'm really excited about as well. Those are the 6 books. I'm gonna set them aside now and we'll wrap up the video. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for being here. Sending my love to you from here to wherever you may be in the world. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up to let me know that you did. Subscribe if you'd like to stick around. I think we get to more books in July. I've already posted my July TBR. Be sure to check that out in the cards and down below. And without further ado, I'll leave you in peace and I'll see you very, very soon in a couple of days for another video. Bye bye.